Whereas a developer, like they're very much kind of at the inception of the project, sometimes follow through to conception and like the actual build, but sometimes they have multiple exit strategies and they actually have some of the most profitable exit strategies at that point in time. They're really taking kind of nothing and turning it into something, like they're very much creatively building something out of nothing. Whereas, builders, they'll just kind of take the plans and build based on the plans. And so the great strategies with development is basically that you have the multiple exits before it can even be built, right? So if you have a vacant land or a vacant lot, or even if there's a little property on there, sometimes it's better to have a property on there because you can maybe get some income from it. And then while you're kind of going through the process of getting plans approved and things like that, you're getting some income while the holding costs, right?
Have you ever thought about investing in land? It's one of the Earth's most important natural resources. There are many ways to build wealth using land, and they're not making any more of it. Our guest this week is Thalia Cuadra, and she shares her journey getting started in real estate investing, as well as her experience with land as an investment strategy. You're listening to the Black Wealth Effect podcast, where we're all about inspiring the next generation of Black Canadian real estate investors to succeed financially. If you're tuned in, that means you're hungry to take action and build wealth outside of your 9 to 5. We'll be sitting down with Black real estate investors, entrepreneurs, and allies to discuss a diverse set of topics to help you along your investing journey. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Black Wealth Effect podcast. I'm your host, Mario Griffiths, and we have another great episode lined up for you today. Before I introduce this week's guest, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment about the show wherever you listen to podcasts so we can keep bringing you this great content. Also, if you haven't already done so, please check out our new Facebook community, the Black Wealth Effect Network. We'll include details in the show notes. I'm so excited to introduce our guest this week, Thalia Cuadra. Thalia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time overdue. I feel like this has had to happen, so I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, we're excited that we're actually making it happen now. I'm definitely excited to have a conversation and learn about your experiences.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so to start, Thalia, I know you got started in real estate investing at a pretty young age. And your parents had a huge impact in terms of kind of developing your mindset, inspiring you to take action. Can you share your experiences just getting started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm 27 years old now. I generally kind of took it seriously, my real estate journey, when I was around 24, 25 years old. So only, shy of 2 years. I think we can all kind of agree that COVID and the pandemic had a switch in perspective, switch of lifestyles and realities for all of us. So for me, being, growing up in the family that I was, so my dad is really big with real estate and really kind of like has ingrained that into me ever since I was young. So I knew that in the back of my head, like that was always there for me to, when I'm ready to go and kind of learn. But yeah, the pandemic really did that for me. I was working a normal 9 to 5, still am, but it's, I just have a different perspective on it now. I kind of use it as leverage as opposed to before it was like the bread and butter of my income. So it was a really big perspective change where, job security isn't so secure. And, we're essentially working for other people's dreams and we're not, taking that time for ourselves to work on our own passions and, the freedom that we look for. We don't really tend to seek that as much when we're in a 9 to 5 comfortably. You're getting the salary, you're getting pension, right, benefits, all these things. So it's really designed to make it convenient for you that you don't look for more or you don't seek out for more. So I knew that since, at a very young age. But again, it was that comfortability where it's like, well, at some point when I need to buy property, I guess I'll go to my dad and ask him. But yeah, the pandemic really shifted things for me. And although I did grow up with, my dad and being in this space and, he's multi-million dollar portfolio, that is his multi-million dollar portfolio. That isn't mine. Right. And although we do talk about generational wealth, one of the biggest things he's taught me is the skills and the mindset to go and go after these things. So, and I always say the biggest wealth transfer is the mindset. It's not really the assets or the money. It's the skill set that you need to sustain that legacy. So at some point, God forbid, my dad leaves us one day, although he's very young. So we'll probably be on this earth at the same time for a while. But, it's a thought in all of our brains, like when my dad does, pass, who will be taking over, who will be kind of taking care of the properties. And, you hear these stories where, trust fund babies or kids that come from a very wealthy family don't necessarily have the skills or the mindset to run the business or like understand that like if there's multiple properties in your family, don't sell it, maybe, you know what I mean? But a lot of people just may not have that information or the education to understand that like that is the generational wealth. You want to keep that in the lineage. So, understanding that and kind of facing again the pandemic, I told him, I was like, listen, teach me everything you know, because I can't just say that my dad is a millionaire. Like I need to say that for myself. So it took me about a year to really get in the game. I went on multiple walkthroughs. I networked with different realtors, kind of got familiar with the space and my market. Essentially, I live in Ottawa, so the market is big, but it's probably not as big as Toronto, obviously not, but it's still kind of like it's a moving city and it's a government city. So like a lot of that impacts the market where people live, where people want to move or location based and things like that. So just getting familiar with my market was the first thing that I did, getting comfortable with different professionals in the space. And it took me about a year with partnerships, I was able to get or buy 13 units across Canada. So I have 8 units in New Brunswick and then 5 units just outside of Ottawa, which I can drive by. I can go see my tenants and things like that. So it's really cool to be able to say that like I was able to do that on my own with the guidance, and I'm just like, oh, so blessed to have that type of guidance. And as I'm going through my journey, I realize like I am very privileged and I'm so, so lucky to have grown up with that type of a mentor, like literally a live-in mentor. Although like my parents aren't together, so they were separated when I was very young. So I had some time with my mom, some time with my dad, but both my parents have taught me so much in their respective like fields. But yeah, it was like an epiphany. It was like, okay, I have like literally a pot of gold in my house, like someone that can literally teach me like the formula of how to become successful or like just, the difference of even being rich and wealthy. Whereas a lot of people like focus on the active income a lot. So it's like active income and working or sales.
Creating your time. Yeah.
Exactly. And we only have 24 hours in our day. We don't have more time to give. So that's a big thing in the pandemic came to me was just like, okay, well, like I could get like 3 jobs at the same time, but like, where does my time go? Like, I don't necessarily have all that time to give. And, we never get that time back, right? We can always make more money, but we can never get that time back. So, just understanding that perspective, but then realizing that, other people need to know this, like other people my age, the fact that in my circle of friends at the time, 25, 26, 27, we're not talking about this stuff. And, you'll see the articles like millennials or people in their 20s are not buying property because we're like not able to afford it, with like the average salary and just the average income that people are making. It's not it's not affordable, especially in the market that we are in. Interest rates are going up. Like someone's mortgage could be $2,000 in January, and now it's 4,000 because of just that interest rate. So it's very hard for people in our generation. But that's why I kind of started this program called the 610 Project. And I'm a big believer in, I'm not anti 9 to 5, but leverage your 9 to 5. And then the time that you do have, work on something that is bigger than you, like work on your dreams, work on, whatever it may be. It doesn't necessarily have to be real estate, but for me, that's what it was. So I would go to my 9 to 5 and then come right home and then study my whatever I was studying, or maybe analyzing some deals, crunching the numbers, and really building that confidence in the field. So like maybe like when you're going to a walkthrough, sometimes people can be nervous, but the moment you understand the numbers and you know what you're looking at and you know your criteria as an investor, it's much easier to kind of filter through whether or not you're going to move forward with that property or not, or how you're going to structure it, or what types of partners that you need to network with to get, to make this deal happen. So yeah, and I started coaching other students, young investors, younger than me that, started to buy property and things like that. So that's what I love to do now. Like it's a part of like my real estate journey. I also got into a little bit of land development, and that is a huge thing, I think, right now, especially because of like specifically in particular cities, when you see the plans, the official plans that this city has for that city, where they're going in the next 5 years, what they plan to build, what the infrastructure like they want to look like. Being in Ottawa specifically, we are lucky because we're kind of like the guinea pigs. They kind of test out things here in Ottawa first sometimes, and then they'll kind of spread it out to either the province or the country, like just with some things.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, so I want to really delve into and talk more about land development. So I love that you brought that up. For somebody who's not familiar with the strategy, can you talk a little bit about, actually, first off, like what are some of the misconceptions when it comes to land development? And then like, what's the value of the strategy itself, in your opinion?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the land development, the misconceptions for sure are you have to have very deep pockets. You got to have like so much money, like, so much money that you can't even imagine. Like it has to be like a big builder or whatever that can only do those types of things. I think everything is hard in life, but I mean that it's probably harder than people think. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot simpler than I think people think. Yeah, probably the biggest misconception is definitely the money for sure. And like just throughout my journey, I've learned that money is never really the issue. It's just like you might not be the one that is providing the money, right? So like partnership, networking in development and land development is a huge thing. It happens all the time. Builders come together with investors, developers specifically. So there, and also, there's a difference between a builder and a land developer, whereas sometimes people kind of combine the two. Whereas a developer, like they're very much kind of at the inception of the project, sometimes follow through to conception and like the actual build. But, sometimes they have multiple exit strategies, and they actually have some of the most profitable exit strategies at that point in time. They're really taking kind of nothing and turning it into something, like they're very much creatively building something out of nothing. Whereas, builders, they'll just kind of take the plans and build based on the plans. And so the great strategies with development is basically that you have the multiple exits before it can even be built, right? So if you have a vacant land or a vacant lot, or even if there's a little property on there, sometimes it's better to have a property on there because you can maybe, get some income from it. And then while you're kind of going through the process of getting plans approved and things like that, you're getting some income while, the holding costs, right? So.
Yeah, no, you touched on it just around like the value of the strategy itself.
Yes.
So, and you touched on the process a little bit.
Yeah.
At a high level, just for our listeners, can you share like what are some of the kind of chronological steps or the different points throughout the land development process where an investor might be able to add value?
Absolutely. So It's a kind of like a normal, you go see the property or you see the land and you kind of have negotiations with the seller or with the realtor, whatever the case may be. But from there, the putting it under
Under
contract.
contract.
Yeah, putting it under contract or placing an offer on it basically is very similar to what a normal property would be, but the conditions will be different, right? So if the plan is to develop on this land, you most likely will have a lot more time. So sometimes conditions can be, like 6 weeks, or they could be like months down the line, or until, you get plans approved. There's a lot of little different things that you need to do as an investor to, get your conditions met, do the due diligence. And that's building a team. Like the team is probably one of the biggest things I would say if you are starting in land development and you're new and it's not, your expertise. Like that's kind of where I came from as an investor. My expertise came from really connecting people and the partnerships and doing the JV joint ventures, and all of that skill comes into play in land development because of you may not be the architect. You're not going to be the urban planner. You're not going to be, the designer or any of those things. You need other people to and outsource those expert skills, right? So at the very beginning, I got in contact with an urban planner, and you can do that through the city. But I actually, because of we've got friends in the field. Karina is a really good friend of ours and in the family, but she is a really good source for us to get where did you go for this, or where, and if you know someone that is in that field, you want to be able to give them the service, hey, let's work together on this, right? So kind of got into the connections with the urban planners. And then once you talk to an urban planner, honestly, you'll learn a lot, because the minute you give them an address, they'll be like, oh yeah, you can build this, and this is the zoning and all of that. And really understanding, again, the zoning is probably one of the most important pieces of information that you need when going to develop, because the zoning is what actually tells you what you're allowed to build on it. If you're able to build a 10 unit, if you're able to build, 15 or 4 stories or 10 stories, whatever the case is, you personally as an investor may not have all that information, but it's public information and it's easily findable. Yeah, it's all these things that once I had these conversations with these professionals, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. You learn a lot. You really learn a lot.
Yeah, and I loved how you touched on the importance of that power team, right? So with land development, there are many moving parts and many considerations. And so obviously just connecting with the individuals that you mentioned, extremely important in terms of being successful with the strategy.
100%.
What about your first land development deal? Can you just share your experiences at a high level, the details around the deal, and what did you learn just going through the process?
Yeah, it was very much a learning curve for me. So we had a couple of people on the team working on this deal. So it was in an area in my city where it is very kind of an attractive location, very close to amenities, transit. And you could see that in the next couple of years, that area is a really kind of a hot spot for development. So where this street is there's a couple of empty lots. So there's about 3 lots that were maybe 2 single family homes, and then one in the middle was empty. I have a realtor that, I'm always in touch with. He had bought the middle lot, and he was like, hey, I have, we have an opportunity for the lot next door. I'm working on this one. Let's see what we can do. And I was like, okay, perfect. Let's go see it. So this one had a house on it. And it was we saw the vision, the image was in our head. The zoning was R4N. So for people who don't know, R4N allows you to build up to 4 stories. So that's 14 to 15 unit building that you can build on there. So already we're like, okay, cool. We don't have to do amendments. This is great. We put it under contract. This is where we kind of went, where maybe we could have just had a little bit more, we could have just been more informed at the time, but the seller didn't really allow for us to kind of get all the plans done. before he wanted to lift conditions. Okay. So essentially, when you do a development, you want to make sure that you have the time to kind of get all your site plan approvals done and things like that. But with the city, like that could take like up to a year. You know what I mean? Like that process is a very long process, dependent on, sometimes it could be 6 months, sometimes, but it's dependent on, the city really. And those processes could be slow. But we didn't have that time given to us throughout the condition period. He essentially wanted us to just buy it out, and then kind of we deal with the SPA at the end. And, that is, I guess some people can do that, but because we were in partnership and we're investors kind of looking for people to invest in it with us, we needed that time. You know what I mean? So that time is really important. I think we only had about 2 weeks to lift conditions. We did everything else. We did the inspections, and we had to do some extra inspections because of the, once you go do a site plan approval, there are some things that you need to test, like the ground, make sure that the soil is not toxic, like all these things that I had no idea about, to be honest. And like maybe there's trees that are, being built or not built, but, that are growing that are maybe you're not able to build on top of them. So like all of that, all of those little details are really important for you to know. But again, the professionals that you have on your team, they'll be able to tell you like, this is what you do. But yeah, we essentially we just needed more time. So we didn't follow through with that property or that deal essentially, but it was really eye-opening. And by the time I think that we were about to lift conditions, I think what had happened was, because the lot on right next door to us was being built, and that one was kind of vacant. So they had no property on it. Whereas we had like a single family home on it, but you would have to do like renovations for it to be like livable. So it's like a lot of the, different things that like we would have to put money into it, more money into it for the holding of that time period. It was just kind of like increasing. And then I think it was around the summertime where there was one of the interest rate hikes, and we did not properly get a commitment letter from our lender. And it kind of just, our numbers kind of just got ruined at that point. And, as an investor, it's based on the numbers, like if our exit strategy does not align or is not profitable for any of us on the team, we had to move on. Even though like the vision is there, the idea is there, we tried to negotiate with the seller kind of in terms of price. But yeah, it didn't pan out. However, I just actually last week figured out that it's still on the market, that particular lot. So it's interesting because there's some sellers that sometimes they're not as, I guess, not
knowledgeable.
Yeah, they're not knowledgeable. They're not really like, they're behind in like where the market is, so they're very kind of attached to this price. They're very anchored to a price when, for us, we know that like it's not that valuable. And we know as investors or as developers, I guess, the minute that we get plans together, we get site plan approvals, that increases the value by a lot, right? So like even from taking the lot with no plans, no anything, to taking it with plans, but nothing was actually really done, that already increases the value of that piece of land. So as a developer, it could be very lucrative. And it might be one of the largest, one of the largest exit strategies in terms of like how much money you can make in that one little step, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. What were some of your key takeaways just going through that first deal? Like, it sounds like you learned a ton.
Yeah, key takeaways is definitely building the team before you kind of get a deal under contract, because that's kind of what it was for us. Like we got it under contract and we're like, oh, okay, we need like this person. We need an architect. We need to know, like what builder that we can maybe, like, we didn't have that lined up. So like having those people lined up already on your team, because things can go fast, and, sometimes sellers are not patient and they need what they need. And just understanding what you need at the very beginning. Like when you sign that contract, when you're placing the offer, if you need time to get plans approved or things like that, make sure that is in there and that you don't kind of cheap out on that, because you will need the time. Like that was my biggest takeaway for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to your point, like really focusing on that due diligence process,
Mm-hmm.
ensuring you have that power team in place, and then contingency planning, right?
100%. Because, it's not like a traditional property. Like you have the expenses, sometimes there could be variables in that, of course, like, insurance, taxes, things like that. They won't be the exact same. However, when you're looking to develop and build, those variables can be quite large and like they're bigger numbers. So like 1% difference can make a really big difference. So definitely keeping that contingency plan in like on lock and very much be conservative with the numbers, inflate them as much as possible, stress test the numbers as much as possible. And that's just in the market that we are in, like even development, but like any property that you're working on, the stress testing of the numbers is like one of the most important things, because that's where you'll get eaten alive if you're not careful.
Yeah. Great tips. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
And so at the time of recording this episode, we're, I want to say, a couple months away or recently, like Bill 23 passed,
Yes.
which is a huge win from a land development perspective.
Mm-hmm.
For our listeners that aren't familiar with what the bill is or kind of what that entails, can you just share at a high level what it is, and then what are some of the wins for investors?
Yeah. So Bill 23, yes, a very, very recent bill that they just passed. So it's interesting because I think dependent on some things, right? Zoning, lot size, and things like that, you are able to build up to 10 units without site plan approvals. Now, that's a huge thing, only because, like we were just mentioning, the site plan approval process is the longest part of the development and the most time consuming, can also be the most expensive. Like when they say cost in terms of site plan approval, those are soft costs. That could be like upwards of 200,000, right? Like, and that's something that you have to be ready for. So to not have that burden is incredible for developers in terms of like how fast you can get something done. So instead of maybe, the project taking a year and a half to get the site plan approval and then you build it like afterwards. So like the whole project takes 2 years, you take the site plan approval out of the equation, maybe you can do it within 6 to 7 months, right? Or, maybe in the year, and you have way less cost that is associated with that because of you don't have to go through those processes. I'm pretty sure there's obviously some things you'll have to do and kind of get some approval from the city, but it's not as intense as I guess it was before. And 10 units it's impactful. Like that's meant, it's very significant. If you're taking from 1 unit to 10 units, you've literally kind of just added 10 more incomes in that one little space. So, or one little space, that piece of land, wherever it is. And again, dependent on where you are, this is like it's a great way to intensify a neighborhood. So like, that's kind of something, just in terms of Ottawa, that's what they're trying to do, because we have a lot of like suburban areas. So if you go in the suburban areas, it's a lot of like single family homes kind of like lined up looking the exact same, right? We all know those neighborhoods. Whereas now they're kind of, implementing the intensification. So, more communal buildings. So, instead of like a single family home, maybe like a fourplex, and then, maybe grandma lives in one of the units, and then, it's more of like a communal thing, whereas multiple types of people, different age groups can live in one area, as opposed to like different neighborhoods completely, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really impactful for developers. It's like really a great time to be alive, to be honest with you. It's one of the best things I think that they've passed. And just as an investor, someone who was maybe not inclined to go into development because of like that whole time consuming thing, and like you need some money to kind of get started, this is now opening a lot of doors for investors that, can kind of do the same thing without going through the very intense process. So yeah, amazing thing. So whoever's watching or listening to this, go deep into that because it's useful. It's useful information regardless,
100%.
Mhm.
Definitely sounds like there's a lot of opportunity this
100%.
passing. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. And you touched on it a little bit, but like what advice would you give an investor looking to start investing in land, as well as like what resources like do you regularly use on a day-to-day basis, whether it's like a city plan as an example, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
that you'd recommend our listeners to look into?
Yeah, definitely like get familiar with your, again, like you said, like the city's plan. Like it's something that we don't really think about, but it's all public information. These are all things that are free to the public to know. It's your city, right? Like you want to be able to know what the area that you're in, what they plan on doing. If you are an investor and you're investing into property in that city or in that market, you want to be able to know, like, what is my place in that? You essentially become a participant in the development of your city. And so, the city websites, or I'm really big on, finding the Facebook groups that, certain neighborhoods will have, right? So like particularly my neighborhood, it's called Vanier neighborhoods or Vanier neighbors. And so, you'll see all the comments of your neighbors, right? All the people that live in that community, because as investors, we look at things differently. But, sometimes you want to see the perspective of someone who actually lives there, right? Because I'm, someone who really takes pride in like being ethical in the way I go about my properties, and just there's a lot of controversy around investors or developers, all around. So it's interesting to kind of see the perspective of, just an average person living in that community and what they feel would be better for that community. So look into, certain neighborhoods if the market that you're looking into or that you want to invest in, really get familiar with those particular neighborhoods, because the people living there, they can tell you a lot more than you probably think, right? Maybe the city website won't have that type of information, like what Susan thinks on the side of the road or on the end of the road, what she would particularly like to see in her neighborhood or things like that, And then just other, get informed with just other people, other investors, network, go to conferences, go to, and even in COVID, like there wasn't a lot of like the in-person thing. We had a lot of like Zoom calls and things like that. However, like I will say that anything in person is so much different than just being on Zoom. Like let's say you're going to a mastermind or a master class, or like you're going to learn about something. The energy is completely different when you're like in the room with people and like kind of masterminding, giving different experiences, different point of views. And so very much like having that partnership around you and like building that team already, so that you can be like, oh, I knew I met this architect at some point, and then you reconnect like, hey, I was thinking about you, I'm working on this deal, and like kind of building that rapport already without even having anything really to work on yet, but it's just kind of building that partnership beforehand. And it's a lot more seamless for you to build that team. But when you don't know everything, which we don't, right? Nobody knows everything. You're going to need that team, and that just understanding who to go to is also a big thing for me. So
Solid advice. Thanks so much for sharing that. Thalia, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you sharing your experiences. Before I let you go, if you could just share with our listeners what's next for you when it comes to real estate investing, and how can they best reach out to you?
yeah, so what's next for me? So I am definitely diving more deeper into the development, as this new bill has passed. I'm going to be, I do a lot of speaking now. So I'm kind of like a little bit more on stages, and it's kind of nerve wracking, but I do love that. Like I said, the energy in rooms and things like that. So I'm going to be around. Like I want to be going to different cities, meeting people and networking and things like that, just to see what other people are up to. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be building my portfolio in terms of development in the next year, and really seeing the possibilities that this new bill has created for us. So And where to reach me? Well, you can reach me honestly anywhere. I'm on Instagram, invest with Thalia. My Facebook is Thalia Cuadra, and yeah, all that good stuff. Like wherever social media is, I'm there. Yeah, if anybody has questions, want to reach out, I am like literally an open book. So
fantastic. Thank you so much, Thalia. Appreciate the time again.
thank you so much.
To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Black Wealth Effect podcast. We'll catch you later.
What was the one thing you heard today that inspires you to take action? Now plan to take that action in the next 24 hours. If you're looking for more support, ideas, or just want to connect with others like you taking action, join us in the Black Wealth Effect Facebook group. The link is in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Black Wealth Effect podcast.